When the coroner lifts Clara Jensen's sleeve, the fibers glisten under forensic light. Washed fabric, faint blood residue, and a question no lab can answer. Who cleaned her before she was found? The report lists her time of death between 4:40 and 5:20 a.m., the window when most of Ashland still slept. The ground beneath her body was damp but undisturbed, showing no signs of struggle or transport. The injury to her head, a single impact to the left temple, was fatal but clean, suggesting an impulsive strike delivered from close range. Yet the body's presentation told another story. No dirt, no debris, only the sterile calm of someone who had tried to undo what had already been done. The initial responders noted the incongruity immediately. The park's soil was thick with cedar pollen and wet leaves, but her jeans showed none. Even her sneakers, still tied, were free of mud. The coroner's notes were concise. Victim appears recently washed or dressed post-mortem. Whoever had placed her there didn't just want to hide the act, they wanted to purify it. Clara Jensen, 16 years old, honor roll student, had last been seen leaving the high school library just after 7:30 the previous evening. Surveillance showed her exiting alone, carrying a backpack and a small white folder. That folder was missing from the recovery scene. Her phone was found 20 meters away, powered off and reset, all user data wiped except for fragments of cached conversations. One contact marked as ER. Detectives soon learned ER referred to Evan Reed, a fellow student and Clara's former project partner. When questioned, Evan said he'd been home all night. His mother, Melissa Reed, confirmed the same story, before anyone had publicly identified Clara as the victim. The timestamp of that call, made before the name was released, became the first fracture in a mother's version of truth. At the forensic lab, specialists examined Clara's clothing under alternate light sources. Blood traces were diluted, patterned vertically, as if the garment had been submerged and wrung dry. A residual mixture of sodium carbonate and optical brightener was consistent with commercial laundry detergent. The finding was distinct enough to narrow possible product matches to two brands distributed locally. Those same brands appeared later in receipts pulled from the Reed family trash. Investigators obtained permission to search the Reeds' residence. Inside the laundry room, the air smelled faintly of bleach. The washing machine's internal filter was still damp, streaked with residue invisible to the naked eye. When tested, it glowed pale blue under luminol, a response consistent with trace human blood. The stain was faint, but faint never meant clean. Melissa Reed's composure during questioning was deliberate. She spoke with the authority of a nurse, deflecting with procedure. Bleach is part of hospital sanitation, yet her hospital shift logs showed her clocking out at 11:45 p.m. and returning at 4:10 a.m. When asked about the gap, she replied that the badge scanners were unreliable. Her answer was technically possible, but emotionally impossible, the kind of precision that only appears when someone rehearses a lie. In the evidence catalog, one item drew special attention. A white t-shirt, size medium, found hanging behind the laundry door, still damp at the seams. Forensic analysis revealed diluted blood traces matching Clara Jensen's DNA. A partial fingerprint from Evan was located near the collar. It was not yet enough for an arrest, but it built a geometry of guilt: proximity, concealment, protection. Digital analysts worked through Clara's erased messages. At 9:12 p.m., she had written, "Meet me at the park. I need to talk." The recipient was Evan. The text was sent, delivered, deleted. The next draft, never sent, contained 4 words: "You can't fix this." By midnight, the working theory had changed. Not a random assault, not a stranger, but a mistake buried beneath maternal hands. The lab confirmed the detergent from Clara's clothes, and the residue from the reed washer shared the same optical brightener signature, the same hospital-grade batch. Procurement logs tied it directly to Melissa's department. From that point, investigators stopped describing the event as teen violence. It became a forensic study in silence. In the sterile light of the morgue, every washed fiber told the same story. Love had been confused with cleansing, and truth with protection. The following morning, a gray fog rolled through Ashland, settling low over the rooftops. Inside the Reed residence, investigators conducted a formal search under a limited warrant. The atmosphere felt curated, every item folded, every surface polished. The silence inside the house wasn't absence, it was control. Technicians collected residue from the washing machine seal. Within minutes, the cotton swabs reacted pale pink under luminol. Spectrographic analysis confirmed it. Diluted hemoglobin mixed with detergent surfactant. The ratio matched the chemical pattern on Clara Jensen's blouse. The same formula that had once cleaned hospital linens was now binding a homicide to a home. Melissa Reed stood in the doorway as the evidence was logged. She maintained a posture of professional composure, answering each question with precision. "I wash uniforms often," she explained, voice flat. "I keep bleach for work fabrics." The statement was recorded, but her eyes betrayed a fixed focus, not on the officers, but on the washer drum, as if calculating what they might find next. At the same time, Evan sat in the precinct interview room. His right hand trembled on the table. Small abrasions lined his knuckles, partially healed. Asked about them, he said he'd scraped them on a locker. Detectives made no comment, but the injury pattern, linear, shallow, lateral, was consistent with blunt force contact. He looked less like a suspect than a remnant of someone else's decision. At the forensic lab, the blue polyester fibers recovered from Clara's sleeve were matched to nitrile cleaning gloves used exclusively in the Rogue Valley Medical Center. Shipment records confirmed that Melissa's unit had received that brand days before the homicide. It was a sterile connection, but precise, proof not of the strike, but of the sanitization that followed it. Detectives reconstructed the night chronologically. 11:45 p.m. Melissa's badge logs her exit from the hospital. 12:18 a.m. Her car appears on surveillance near Lithia Park. 4:10 a.m. Her badge registers re-entry. Between those hours, Clara Jensen died, was cleaned, and placed beneath a cedar tree. In homicide work, coincidence is statistical noise, but repetition is intent. By mid-afternoon, the lab had processed the white T-shirt from the Reed laundry room. Under infrared imaging, faint text appeared along the collar, Ashland High Athletics. The same lettering style found in school-issued gym apparel. DNA swabs confirmed a diluted but identifiable match to Clara. It wasn't theoretical anymore. It was physical. Melissa returned to the precinct voluntarily. She appeared rested, almost serene. When shown the lab photographs, she said quietly, "I wash what needs washing." No tremor, no hesitation. She asked if her son was present. He wasn't. She looked down, folded her hands, and said nothing further. Later that evening, new surveillance footage surfaced. A gas station camera captured Melissa's car idling at 12:11 a.m. She never left the vehicle, but the reflection in the window revealed movement in the passenger seat, the outline of a second person. Forensic height estimation from the video placed the figure between 5'8" and 5'9". Evan Reed was 5'8". The evidence no longer pointed to isolation. It pointed to partnership. At the hospital, colleagues described Melissa as meticulous and emotionally distant. One coworker recalled her saying, "Some stains don't lift, no matter what you use." It had been dismissed as fatigue, but now the phrase returned as a coded confession. Meanwhile, analysts at the state lab completed DNA sequencing from the gloves found in her locker. 2 profiles emerged, one female, one male. The female matched Melissa. The male was a partial match to Evan. The gloves had been worn twice, by 2 people bound by one secret. In the backyard of the Reed home, investigators found scorched soil behind the shed. Buried in the ash were melted fragments of a phone case and notebook wire. Chemical tests identified traces of isopropyl alcohol, a clean-burning accelerant. The components matched Clara's missing phone model. The burn pattern suggested control, not panic. When confronted with the findings, Melissa lowered her head and whispered, "He didn't mean to." She did not clarify who he was, and the officers didn't ask. The statement alone altered the investigation. Intent had entered the record. That evening, a new search began in Lithia Park. Under the cedar tree, 30 meters from the discovery site, technicians uncovered a rounded stone with faint reddish staining. Tests revealed detergent residue on its surface, the same optical brightener compound from the Reed household. It was the final link between what was washed and what remained unclean. By the end of day 2, the case file was labeled with a provisional title: Domestic Interference, Maternal Erasure Hypothesis. The lead investigator underlined a single phrase in his notes: cleaning as confession. Sure, forensic evidence tells the truth in fragments, but sometimes the spaces between those fragments form a mother's outline. On the 3rd day of the investigation, the evidence table was no longer arranged in tidy lines. Photographs overlapped, timestamps crossed one another, and chemical reports stacked in uneven piles. The pattern that had once looked like coincidence now read as choreography. Evan Reed had withdrawn completely. He refused food during questioning, answered in half-sentences, and stared at the wall as if waiting for something to stop. His attorney requested suspension of further interviews. The request was granted, but investigators pressed on with forensic reconstruction. From his confiscated phone, technicians recovered a single corrupted voice memo, 34 seconds long. It contained ambient park noise, crickets, wind, then a faint female voice, Clara's, saying, "You can't just," followed by an abrupt impact and static. The sound frequency analysis matched the acoustic signature of a rounded stone striking soft tissue. The same object type was later recovered from the park, carrying both detergent residue and partial blood proteins. It was not just a weapon. It was a tool of silence, wiped and washed to erase the sound it had made. Investigators traced the digital deletions on Evan's laptop. Metadata confirmed that the erasures of his conversation with Clara occurred between 12:03 and 12:09 a.m., within minutes of Melissa's hospital exit log. 2 devices, 2 deletions, 1 timeline. The odds of parallel coincidence were statistically negligible. The working model shifted. Mother and son, separate in action, but united in concealment. In the Reed's backyard, excavation teams expanded their search perimeter. Beneath the topsoil behind the tool shed, they discovered a shallow burn pit lined with bricks. Within it lay fused remnants of notebook paper, melted plastic, and warped aluminum consistent with a smartphone frame. Trace analysis identified microscopic gold connectors typical of mobile processors. Clara's phone had never been lost. It had been methodically destroyed. Melissa denied involvement. "I don't burn trash," she said. But a lighter with her fingerprints had been found among the ashes. The flame pattern on its casing matched the burn radius of the pit. Her voice remained calm as she repeated the phrase, "I didn't see anything that night." Detectives noted how the phrasing avoided denial. She hadn't said she wasn't there, only that she hadn't seen. It was the kind of absence only truth could leave behind. At the lab, The washing machine filter was re-examined under higher magnification. Embedded within the detergent residue, analysts found one strand of long, light brown hair. It was not Clara's, it was not Melissa's. DNA sequencing identified it as Evans'. The conclusion was unavoidable. The clothing washed after the crime included his own. The purpose was not to destroy evidence of contact with the victim, but to cleanse the act from both of them. Detectives constructed the reconstruction hour by hour. 9:12 p.m. Clara's text, "Meet me at the park." 9:38 p.m. Last activity on her phone. 10:01 p.m. Data deletion. 11:45 p.m. Melissa leaves the hospital. 12:18 a.m. Vehicle near the park. 4:10 a.m. Re-entry log. 5:42 a.m. Discovery of the body. The sequence was linear, seamless, almost rehearsed. When a lie becomes that precise, it stops being fear and becomes design. A witness surfaced late that evening. A jogger reported seeing a car with its headlights off parked along the park's north trail entrance around midnight. The make and model matched Melissa's sedan. The jogger also mentioned hearing what sounded like a washing machine running through an open garage window as he passed the Reed home at 1:15 a.m. The statement was circumstantial, but it filled the only remaining gap: the time between the act and the cleansing. Meanwhile, internal reports from the hospital revealed an irregular requisition of cleaning supplies signed under Melissa's ID. 2 containers of ultra-pure wash had been logged out for linen testing. Both were later found half-empty in her home. The compound concentration of optical brightener in those containers matched the signature on the stone recovered from the park. At 10:30 p.m., detectives requested a voluntary polygraph. Melissa agreed without hesitation. Her physiological responses remained stable through most questions until one. "Did you assist in cleaning or disposing of Clara Jensen's body?" Her pulse spiked sharply, respiration quickened, and the needle trembled off baseline for 8 full seconds before returning to normal. The examiner's report summarized the result as indicative of conscious deception. The following morning, the district attorney's office authorized the forensic team to reprocess all items from the Reed household under a new classification: evidence of intentional obstruction. The change allowed them to expand testing protocols, not just for what was present, but for what was missing. In the drain trap beneath the sink, technicians found microscopic paper fibers. Under analysis, they matched the notebook paper composition found in Clara's locker. She had kept a project journal, handwritten notes about environmental science, and a personal entry referencing ER and trust. Those pages were now pulp, dissolved by water and bleach. Erasure wasn't a reaction anymore. It was a method. By late afternoon, the investigators gathered in the incident room. Photos of Clara's clean clothing, the washed t-shirt, the gloves, the car footage, the detergent signature, all aligned into one continuous image. A mother's actions radiating outward from a single moment of violence, each one colder and more precise than the last. Evan sat in his room across town, unaware of the latest findings. His social media accounts remained inactive. His friends stopped answering messages. The silence between him and his mother had expanded beyond conversation. It was procedural now, institutional. What they hadn't said to each other had become the case itself. That night, the lead detective added one final note to the case board. "Love behaves like bleach. It removes the color first, then the evidence." The investigation was no longer about who struck the blow, but about who refused to let it exist. The autopsy report on Clara Jensen arrived on a Friday morning. It confirmed what investigators already suspected, but deepened the unease around how deliberate everything had become. The wound pattern indicated a single strike from close range, right-handed, using an object with a rounded edge. There were no defensive injuries, no struggle. The angle of impact suggested Clara was facing slightly away when she was struck, an argument that turned before she could react. It wasn't rage, it was correction. A moment meant to silence, not destroy. Toxicology came back clean. No alcohol, no sedatives, no evidence of coercion. Every chemical sample reinforced the same paradox. The killing was impulsive, but the aftermath had been orchestrated. The hands that cleaned the blood had done so with clinical accuracy. At the Forensic Command Center, analysts refined their digital reconstruction of the deleted texts. The recovered fragments from Evan's device filled part of the missing dialogue. Clara had written, "You lied about the photos. I know what you said." The next line from Evan read, "You don't understand what happens if this gets out." The exchange stopped there. The recovered metadata showed that the message thread was deleted from both phones within 7 minutes of transmission. Evan's online behavior that week revealed another pattern. Repeated visits to searches on juvenile records and "How long does deleted data stay on a phone?" Melissa's browsing history from the same night showed a query for stain removal after blood exposure. Investigators didn't need to speculate. The synchronization of searches spoke for itself. The same impulse that struck the blow had found its echo in the impulse to erase it. That afternoon, detectives interviewed one of Melissa's colleagues, Nurse Karen Doyle. She recalled that during their shift break 2 nights before the murder, Melissa had mentioned that her son was being cornered again at school. Karen described her tone as flat, not angry, like she'd already decided what needed to be done. The statement was recorded and logged under contextual testimony. At 14:17 hours, forensic teams completed a trace analysis of the Reed family washing machine. Inside the gasket lining, microscopic cellulose particles were identified, consistent with notebook paper pulp. That confirmed that paper had been shredded and washed through the machine, likely to destroy written material. Investigators cross-referenced the chemistry with the partially burned paper from the garden pit. Both shared the same brand fiber composition sold in the Ashland High Supply store. Clara's missing project notebook matched that stock. Detectives reconstructed the possible sequence. Evan strikes Clara during an argument. She falls, hits the ground, dies from cranial trauma. Evan panics, calls his mother. Melissa drives from the hospital to the park, retrieves the body, and brings it home. She cleans both her son and the victim's clothing, destroys digital data, and replaces physical evidence with cleanliness. By dawn, the house would smell of bleach and detergent, a domestic chapel of concealment. It wasn't guilt that guided her. It was faith in control. At the same time, an unexpected lead surfaced. Surveillance cameras from a veterinary clinic near the park captured a car resembling Melissa's turning off its headlights at 12:15 a.m. The car stopped for 4 minutes. Thermal enhancement of the footage showed the driver exiting briefly on the passenger side before pulling away. The timestamp aligned precisely with the estimated time of post-mortem transport. Back at the precinct, Evan's silence was beginning to fracture. His attorney allowed limited questioning about the timeline. When asked if he had gone to the park, he said softly, "She wanted to talk." His hands shook. "She kept saying she was going to tell people." Wei asked what she meant, he replied, "I don't know anymore." The statement was partial, yet revealing. Investigators noted the shift from denial to distance, a sign of guilt beginning to take cognitive form. Melissa, questioned again, denied removing Clara's body from the scene. "I left work for an emergency," she said. "I never saw that girl." But her phone's GPS data placed her within 300 feet of the park entrance between 12:10 and 12:25 a.m. She claimed the phone must have been in her car. The device's motion sensor, however, showed active acceleration, tilt, and flashlight activation. data that no stationary phone could generate. At the forensics lab, specialists performed a rehydration analysis of the washed t-shirt fibers. The chemical content revealed faint traces of biological material consistent with cedar pollen and human sweat, the same combination found on Clara's jacket. It was proof that the shirt had been worn in the same environment, not simply contaminated during cleaning. By nightfall, detectives met with the district attorney. The discussion centered on charge classification. There was still no direct witness to the strike, but there was overwhelming evidence of deliberate tampering. Melissa's actions qualified as obstruction, evidence destruction, and potential accessory to homicide. Prosecutors advised a quiet approach. An early arrest risked breaking the chain before the sun cracked. The mother was still the gatekeeper. Meanwhile, a small piece of physical evidence shifted the investigation again. Under ultraviolet examination, the steering wheel of Melissa's car showed faint circular smudges of detergent residue. Inside the trunk, a single strand of Clara's hair was found adhered to the carpet lining. The chemical structure of the hair's root bulb showed degradation consistent with brief immersion in chlorinated water. The forensic report used sterile phrasing, possible temporary submersion. But in plain terms, it meant the body had been washed. Melissa's face, recorded on the interview video that evening, revealed nothing. No twitch, no recoil. Her pulse remained steady, her voice even. When told about the hair in her trunk, she asked, "Is that proof?" The detective answered, "Not yet." She nodded once and said, "Then it's just hair." The line was clinical, detached, and devastatingly accurate. She had learned the language of ambiguity from the profession meant to heal. In the command room that night, detectives reviewed the entire sequence again. The evidence told one story in physical form, another in intent. Evan acted out of fear. Melissa acted out of conviction. Together they created a procedural illusion of innocence, woven from detergent and discipline. At 23:40, a message arrived from the state lab. The rounded stone retrieved from the park contained 2 DNA traces. The primary matched Clara. The secondary, faint and partial, matched Evan Reed. No third contributor. The weapon had been handled by one person, cleaned by another. The detective in charge wrote a single note beneath the result. She didn't kill her. She sterilized the truth. In most murders, the weapon defines the act. In this one, the cleaning defined the weapon. By the 5th day, the case had moved beyond the stage of collection and into pattern reconstruction. The evidence didn't form a puzzle anymore. It formed an anatomy. Every piece connected through motion, pressure, and chemical trace. Each discovery no longer revealed what happened, but what had been deliberately undone. The district attorney authorized continuous surveillance of the Reed residence. Detectives installed a discreet camera across the street and monitored the movements of mother and son separately. Evan left the house only once that day, walking to the end of the block before returning 10 minutes later. Melissa made 3 trips to her car, each time carrying sealed garbage bags. They were retrieved from a public dumpster later that night. Inside, sterile medical gloves, a bottle of bleach, and shredded hospital forms with her signature partially intact. Forensic analysis confirmed that one glove carried diluted traces of human protein and optical brightener, the same detergent signature as before. The bags also contained a strip of white cotton fabric with faint elastic threading, possibly from the hem of a t-shirt. The stains were consistent with previous samples tied to Clara Jensen. At the precinct, the investigative board was rearranged. Clara's image, once centered, was now surrounded by concentric circles of data, each representing a phase of erasure: digital, material, emotional. The innermost circle contained a single word: mother. It was the axis on which the entire event rotated. A team of behavioral analysts was brought in from Salem to construct psychological profiles. Their initial assessment described Evan as acutely dependent, emotionally suppressed, and displaying learned compliance. His silence was not resistance, but loyalty. Melissa, by contrast, was described as a controlling caregiver whose empathy manifests as management of outcomes. She believed protection required removal of imperfection. In her world, guilt could be washed away like blood from linen. Meanwhile, the forensic lab completed its third-stage analysis of the washing machine gasket. Beneath the soap residue, microscopic grit particles were found, small fragments of cedar bark. It placed the machine's load in direct contact with material from the park. The likelihood of random contamination was negligible. At 10:14 a.m., detectives met with the hospital's internal compliance officer. Records showed that Melissa had accessed the staff locker room surveillance footage at 4:25 a.m. on the morning of the homicide. The footage itself had been deleted 2 hours later. The access log bore her employee ID. She explained it as a routine audit, but she had never been assigned that responsibility. The deletion timestamp aligned precisely with the police's first arrival at the crime scene. By noon, the detective leading the case made an informal observation in the report. The subject's actions show intent to maintain cleanliness across all environments: home, work, and now data. It wasn't the behavior of panic. It was ritual. Evan's third interview began at 2 p.m. He was pale, dehydrated, and unsteady. A psychologist sat in the room to monitor his condition. When asked about the argument with Clara, he said, "She was going to tell the principal." Asked what about, he answered, "It doesn't matter now." His pulse accelerated. The interviewer waited. After 15 seconds, Evan added, "She said my mom would find out." Then silence. The phrase was recorded in the transcript and later underlined twice. It suggested a reversal of sequence, that Clara's threat wasn't directed at him, but at the truth about his mother. The implication altered everything. Perhaps Clara knew about something beyond a fight. Maybe about a previous event, a prior cover-up, something Melissa had already cleaned. To confirm, detectives revisited hospital logs from the previous year. One entry stood out: a patient complaint alleging misplaced medication vials under Melissa's supervision. The case had been dismissed internally as recording error, but the compliance file noted that she had erased inventory data herself. The word sterilization appeared in her written explanation. It was procedural language, but in hindsight, it felt personal. That night, investigators executed a full forensic scan of Melissa's car. In the carpet beneath the rear seats, trace amounts of luminol reactive residue appeared, streaks invisible to the naked eye. Subsequent testing confirmed diluted blood consistent with Clara's DNA. A hair fiber belonging to Evan was recovered from the same location. The trunk had been cleaned, but the silence of bleach is never perfect. The rehook came through data, not blood. The backup server from Melissa's phone, previously dismissed as empty, yielded a small cache of automatically saved thumbnails. Photographs deleted before upload. They were incomplete, corrupted by overwriting. But one image survived enough for recognition. A white shirt submerged in a sink, water tinted faint pink, a hand wearing a blue nitrile glove pressing down on the fabric. Metadata placed the photo at 3:04 a.m., during the 4-hour window when Melissa was unaccounted for. When confronted with the recovered image, Melissa did not speak. She studied it for nearly a minute, then asked quietly, "You think that's proof?" The investigator responded, "It's time." She shook her head. "It's not what you think." Then she folded her hands again, the same gesture she'd made on the first day. That evening, as storm clouds built over Ashland, the precinct lights stayed on. Inside, the evidence chart stretched wall to wall. Fibers, timestamps, detergent formulas, and GPS coordinates converging into one clean geometry. The mother at the center, the son orbiting in smaller circles, the victim suspended between them like the space between confession and cleansing. In the silence before leaving for the night, the lead detective wrote a note at the bottom of the incident board. "There's no such thing as spotless love. What began as protection had evolved into precision, and precision in forensics is indistinguishable from intent." By the sixth day, the investigation no longer resembled a homicide inquiry. It had become a clinical reconstruction of an emotional system collapsing under its own logic. Every sample, every timestamp, every photograph now described not just what had happened, but how far a mother would go to keep the surface unbroken. The crime was no longer the death itself, it was the maintenance of order after it. The prosecutor's office had begun drafting formal charges for obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and accessory to homicide. But before any indictment could proceed, investigators needed the decisive proof, confirmation that Melissa had personally handled Clara's body. Chemical traces suggested it. Time logs supported it. Yet in the sterile world of forensic science, implication was never enough. That morning, the Oregon State Crime Lab delivered the long-awaited mitochondrial analysis on the mixed DNA from the nitrile gloves recovered in Melissa's locker. The results were precise. Alongside Melissa's profile, the second contributor was definitively identified as Clara Jensen. Trace epithelial cells, consistent with post-mortem contact, were embedded deep in the glove's inner lining. The probability of accidental transfer was less than 1 in 10 billion. Detectives gathered in the operations room at 08:12 a.m. The finding was read aloud in silence. The moment was procedural, not dramatic, but everyone in the room understood what it meant. For the first time, the evidence no longer described an act of concealment. It described contact. Melissa Reed had touched Clara's body after death. While the team processed this result, another data set arrived from digital forensics. The image fragments from Melissa's phone backup, the series of corrupted photos recovered from cloud storage, were partially restored using AI-assisted interpolation. One image became almost complete. A white garment, soaked, pressed beneath gloved hands inside a stainless steel sink. Reflected faintly in the surface of the metal faucet was part of a face. The facial metrics matched Melissa's. She was washing the shirt. The timestamp confirmed it. 3:04 a.m. Investigators now had the triangulation they had waited for: time, DNA, and physical reflection. They informed the district attorney's office at once. At 09:40 a.m., surveillance observed Melissa leaving her house, carrying a small suitcase. She locked the door, checked the handle twice, and drove east. The car was intercepted 20 minutes later without resistance. She was cooperative, polite, and almost relieved. She requested that her son not be present during questioning. Inside the interrogation room, she sat upright, hands folded on the table as before. When shown the restored photo, she studied it without blinking. Her words were measured. "That's me cleaning a shirt. You can't prove whose." The lead investigator replied, "We already have." He placed the glove report on the table. Melissa glanced down, exhaled once, and closed her eyes. "Then it's done," she said. No further statement followed. While she was processed, detectives executed a final search warrant on the Reed residence. The washing machine was removed entirely and transported to the lab for full disassembly. Inside the pump assembly, engineers found what no one expected: a small oval earring stud lodged in the filter housing. It was silver, with a cracked pearl setting. Clara's mother later confirmed it had belonged to her daughter. It was the first piece of evidence not sterilized, the only fragment that survived the cleansing. The find triggered a procedural shift. With the glove DNA, the photo, and the earring, Prosecutors upgraded the case to accessory after the fact with aggravating circumstances. Melissa was officially charged at 1840 hours. At the same time, Evan remained under juvenile supervision. His attorney insisted that his client had acted in fear and had confessed privately to his mother the night of the incident. The confession itself was unrecorded, but the psychological assessment confirmed trauma responses consistent with post-crisis dependence. He had transferred responsibility upward, to the only authority he trusted. That transference had become the operating engine of the crime. His impulse to confess, her impulse to erase. During her preliminary hearing, Melissa refused a plea agreement. Her statement to the court was short. "I cleaned what was left because no one else would." The judge ordered a psychological evaluation and remanded her in custody. The press coverage labeled her the nurse who washed the truth. Inside the forensics division, analysts continued working long after the public interest faded. They were looking for the final anomaly, the proof of how she transported the body. A traffic camera near the southern exit of Lithia Park eventually yielded the missing frame. Melissa's car passing at 12:23 a.m. Trunk slightly ajar, a corner of white fabric visible through the gap. Forensic imaging enhanced the pattern of the fabric texture, identical to the blouse Clara had worn. By the end of the week, the evidence catalog contained over 200 entries. What had begun as an isolated death now read like an instructional manual on controlled concealment. Each act of cleaning had left its own stain, chemical, digital, or emotional, and together they formed a perfect negative of the truth. Yet even then, one question remained unanswered. Why had Clara wanted to meet Evan that night? What had she discovered that made her write, "You lied about the photos"? When detectives reviewed her recovered laptop, they found fragments of an encrypted folder. Inside, a single recovered thumbnail showed Evan in a school hallway, surrounded by classmates, his expression tense. The file title read, "Exposure MP4." Hadilam, analysts determined the video had been recorded 2 weeks before Clara's death and likely captured an incident of bullying or harassment. Its deletion suggested Evan feared public embarrassment more than punishment. The detail reframed everything. Clara hadn't threatened violence, only disclosure. What followed wasn't premeditated malice. It was fear metastasized into silence. And when that fear reached his mother, it turned into purification. The report's closing section summarized the dynamic clinically. Subject E. Reed, precipitating actor. Subject M. Reed, post-event regulator. Motive, protection through elimination of evidence. Outcome, preservation of family integrity at the cost of reality. At the lab, the lead technician filed the final note on the case under the heading, "Domestic Cleansing Phenomenon." It read simply, "The residue of detergent persists longer than the truth it hides." In the courtroom months later, when the prosecution replayed the recovered voice memo, Clara's last word cut short by impact, Melissa did not react. But Evan looked up for the first time since his arrest, eyes fixed on his mother. He whispered something no microphone caught. Whatever he said made her close her eyes and nod once, slowly, as if acknowledging a fact both had known all along. The sound of washing still echoed in the room, mechanical, rhythmic, endless, like a heartbeat built from guilt and water. In criminal analysis, there is a threshold where data stops describing behavior and starts describing belief. By the 7th day of the Reed investigation, that line had been crossed. What began as a procedural reconstruction had become a study in conviction. A mother's quiet certainty that purification could rewrite consequence. Melissa Reed no longer existed as a suspect in the files. She existed as a system of order that consumed chaos. After her formal arraignment, Melissa was transferred to the Jackson County Detention Facility. She refused all visitors except her attorney. She ate little, spoke less, and spent hours staring at the wall. Guards described her as calm, almost peaceful. The intake psychologist reported a fixed affect consistent with moral certainty. Evan remained under juvenile supervision in a separate facility. According to his assigned counselor, his sleep was fragmented, his behavior oscillating between numbness and agitation. He asked repeatedly if his mother was okay, but never once inquired about Clara Jensen. The separation between guilt and empathy was complete. She had absorbed his portion of conscience. The investigative team continued to process residual evidence. One item in particular, a digital fragment recovered from Melissa's hospital workstation, drew renewed attention. It was an unsent email draft addressed to herself, saved automatically at 4:32 a.m., just after she returned to work. The text was only 12 words. He told me, "I did what I had to do. Forgive me." It was unsigned and never transmitted, but the metadata confirmed authorship. It became the emotional core of the case file. At the same time, forensic technicians concluded the deep chemical examination of the Reed washing machine. In the lowest part of the pump housing, microscopic metallic particles were detected. Under magnification, they appeared as faint silver flecks. Spectrographic comparison matched them to the broken pearl earring found earlier. The final confirmation that Clara's body had been washed inside that machine. The district attorney authorized additional charges: tampering with human remains and perjury. The additions transformed the case from procedural obstruction into something more existential, an ethical breach carried out with surgical control. During interviews, Melissa maintained that she had only tried to protect what was left. When asked why she didn't call emergency services, she replied, "Because the truth was already dead." The statement was logged without commentary. That same afternoon, Evan's therapist provided investigators with a partial transcript of their sessions. He described the moment he told his mother what had happened in the park. "She didn't yell," he said. "She just started asking questions. What was on my shirt? Where my shoes were, if anyone saw." Then, after a pause, "She said she'd fix it." The therapist marked the phrase "fix it" 3 times in his notes. It was not a command. It was an inheritance. The investigative summary was nearly complete, but one final analysis remained: the auditory reconstruction of the 34-second voice memo from Evan's phone. Using ambient echo profiling, sound engineers recreated the environment of the recording: open air, moderate wind, one metallic reverberation after the impact, possibly from a ring-striking stone. When overlaid with hospital supply records, a correlation emerged. Melissa's wedding ring, worn on her right hand, had a slight dent consistent with that metallic ping. No one could confirm whether she had been present during the strike, but the acoustic evidence blurred the border between witness and participant. In the early evening, the lead detective met privately with the district attorney. They reviewed the totality of evidence: digital, physical, psychological. The prosecutor summarized the case in one line: "There are no loose ends. There's only what she wanted us to see." The comment, dry and clinical, captured the essence of Melissa Reed. At 21:15, a detention officer noted unusual activity in Melissa's cell. She had been observed washing her hands repeatedly in the sink, scrubbing long after the water ran clear. When told to stop, she replied, "It's not coming off." She wasn't referring to blood. There was none. The report described the action as compulsive cleansing behavior. The following morning, during her mental evaluation, Melissa explained, "I thought if I made it clean enough, it would never have happened." Her voice, recorded for the report, was soft and even. The stain was only in the story, not on the shirt. Meanwhile, the Reed home was formally sealed as a crime scene for final processing. Investigators cataloged each room. Every item of fabric, curtains, towels, linens, was newly washed. Not one thread contained dust or residue older than a week. The entire house was an archive of erasure. The neighborhood stayed silent. The high school memorial for Clara was brief, subdued. The teachers spoke about kindness, responsibility, and the importance of asking for help. None of them mentioned the Reeds by name, but everyone understood the omission. In the laboratory logbook, a technician wrote a final observation beside the entry for the recovered washing machine. Cycle complete, no further traces detected. It was both a notation and an epitaph. By now, the investigation had become self-referential, a process examining the act of examination itself, as if the need to know was another form of cleansing. When the final report was submitted, the lead investigator added an unofficial appendix. It was not a statement of law but of pattern. Every mother cleans. Some remove stains from fabric, others from memory. The danger begins when both are treated the same. The file was closed the next morning, pending trial. Melissa's attorney filed for diminished capacity, citing situational psychosis triggered by acute maternal stress. The prosecution rejected it. The trial date was set for late spring. In custody, Melissa stopped speaking altogether. She ate without acknowledgement, responded only by nods. When handed paper and pen for a written statement, she drew a single symbol, a spiral, clockwise, tight, and unbroken. Psychologists later interpreted it as a representation of cleansing, the motion of water in a drain. Evan was transferred to a youth rehabilitation program. His last recorded comment to his counselor was simple. She said she'd make it disappear. She did. The official narrative ended there. But in the evidence archive, on the shelf marked Reed, M, Primary Forensic Materials, the washing machine drum sits sealed in plastic. It is labeled with a warning tag. Do not clean, preserved for exhibit. Even in storage, the object holds its contradiction. A machine built to remove stains, now kept untouched, as proof that some stains never wash out. By the time the case entered its 8th phase, it was no longer confined to evidence rooms or court filings. It had become a symbol, a quiet cautionary tale in law enforcement circles about the limits of proof and the precision of love. The investigators had closed their reports, but the residue of the Reed case lingered, as if the detergent smell had soaked into the paper itself. The courtroom in Medford was small, sterile, and brightly lit. Melissa Reed sat at the defense table, hands folded in front of her as she had during every interview. She wore no jewelry. Her uniform, plain gray, pressed, looked more like hospital scrubs than a prison jumpsuit. Across the aisle, Evan sat in a separate section, flanked by counselors. The distance between them was deliberate, but their posture mirrored, shoulders forward, eyes fixed downward. The prosecution opened with the photographic evidence. The glove DNA, the detergent residue, the restored image from the phone backup. The attorney spoke without dramatics. "This is not a case about a crime of passion," he said. "It is a case about what happens when care replaces conscience." The defense remained silent. Melissa watched the projection of the photo, her own hands pressing down on fabric, and showed no visible reaction. Outside the courtroom, journalists used the phrase "the cleansing case." Commentators debated motive, trauma, motherhood. But the investigators, those who had sifted through residue and silence, avoided speculation. To them, Melissa Reed wasn't a symbol. She was a pattern, measurable, repeatable, clinical. During testimony, forensic experts described the microscopic evidence in detached precision: epithelial transfer, optical brightener spectra, residue persistence. Each term built a ladder of facts, each rung smaller than emotion. Truth, in this case, was chemical, not moral. On the third day, the prosecution played the 34-second audio file. The courtroom remained silent as the faint voice filled the air. "You can't just..." followed by the dull strike and static. When the recording ended, the sound seemed to hang in the room longer than it lasted. Evan's breathing changed audibly. Melissa closed her eyes, but did not cry. Her attorney began his argument the following morning. He didn't deny her actions. Instead, he reframed them. "My client did what she's done every day of her professional life," he said. "She responded to crisis by cleaning it. She believed cleanliness was safety. She extended that belief into a moment that demanded something else." He paused before adding, "It was misguided mercy, not malice." The prosecution countered quietly. "Mercy doesn't require bleach." The jury listened without visible reaction. Most had children of their own. None spoke during recess. The transcripts later recorded several jurors wiping their eyes during closing statements, not from pity, but from fatigue. The case had stripped emotion from every fact until the only feeling left was exhaustion. As the trial advanced, new forensic testimony filled the gaps. The state crime lab confirmed that Clara's earring had lodged in the washer during agitation, likely after submersion of clothing. The detergent ratio was matched precisely to the bottle Melissa had requisitioned from the hospital supply closet. Even the water temperature setting from the machine's memory log, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, aligned with the hospital's sanitation standards. It was not improvised, it was protocol. Evan was called to testify under immunity. His statement was brief. "She said it was already too late," he told the court. "She said I should go upstairs and wait." When asked what happened next, he whispered, "I heard the washer start." The courtroom was silent. The judge requested the statement be repeated for the record. Evan did not repeat it. After his testimony, Melissa requested to speak privately with her counsel. When she returned, she asked to address the court directly. Permission was granted. Her voice remained low, almost detached. "I didn't want to lie," she said. "I wanted it to stop existing. You don't understand what it's like. Seeing what you made, what came from you covered in blood. There isn't a rule for that. There's only instinct." She paused, eyes unfocused. "They keep asking me why I cleaned it. It's because I couldn't touch him until it was gone." The stenographer later noted a brief silence following her words, broken only by the sound of pens scratching on paper. The prosecutor chose not to cross-examine. There was nothing left to clarify. That evening, as the courtroom emptied, a storm swept across the Rogue Valley. The rain outside echoed faintly against the windows, steady and relentless. Reporters described the sound as cleansing. The irony did not escape the investigators who remained inside to review the exhibits one final time. Among the items laid out on the evidence table, the washing machine filter rested inside a sealed case. The lead detective opened the logbook to the first page and reread the initial entry. Subject: unknown. Detergent odor strong. 7 months later, every page following that note described the same odor. Consistent, persistent, inescapable. In the end, the detergent had become more than chemical. It was language, a medium through which guilt tried to disguise itself as care. On the morning of the verdict, the jury returned after 9 hours of deliberation. Melissa Reed was found guilty on all counts except first-degree homicide. The court classified her actions as accessory to manslaughter and obstruction of justice. She received a sentence of 22 years without parole eligibility. As the judge read the sentence, Melissa remained still. Evan looked at her once, just once, and lowered his head. The court officers led her away quietly. After sentencing, an evidence officer sealed the remaining items: the gloves, the stone, the T-shirt, the photo printouts. Each package bore the same tag number, Case 220417R. They were stored together, inside a climate-controlled vault. Over time, the detergent odor faded, but not completely. The final report closed with a single observation from the senior forensic examiner. No process removes everything. Every cycle ends with trace. In the archive, between sealed plastic and stale air, the Reed case settled into documentation. But for the investigators who had touched it, the lesson endured, that purity pursued too far becomes its own form of contamination. Months after the verdict, the Reed case entered its final stage, not in the courtroom, but in the quiet postscript of analysis. Most cases end with incarceration. This one continued, not because of appeal or controversy, but because the data itself refused to settle. Every conclusion produced a faint echo, like detergent foam that never fully dissolved. The correctional facility where Melissa Reed served her sentence sent regular reports to the State Forensic Psychology Board. They documented her routines: early waking, limited appetite, obsessive cleanliness. Guards reported that she washed her cell sink twice an hour and refused to let others handle her clothing. When asked about the habit, she said, "Contamination spreads when you stop watching." The phrase was noted as delusional, but not dangerous. In one session with a prison psychiatrist, Melissa finally broke her long silence. The transcript, classified for months, was later appended to the case file as post-incarceration addendum. The exchange was brief. Psychiatrist: "Why did you wash her, Melissa?" Melissa: "Because she looked cold." Psychiatrist: "You understand she was already dead?" Melissa: "That's why it mattered." Her pulse remained steady during the exchange. The psychiatrist's notes described the statement as pathological empathy intertwined with moral sterilization. Evan, meanwhile, had been relocated to a youth rehabilitation facility in northern Oregon. His progress reports indicated partial responsiveness and minimal emotional range. When prompted to discuss his mother, he said, "She fixed it. She always fixes things." In one of his therapy sessions, he was shown the forensic photographs. He turned them face down and whispered, "She said she'd take it with her." The meaning of that sentence became clear only months later, when investigators reopened Melissa's confiscated notebooks. Stored among medical notes and shift rosters, a small leather-bound planner contained something overlooked during the initial search. Between its pages, written in pencil, were two lists. The first, under the heading Inventory, recorded the sequence of items used in the cleaning: gloves, detergent, bucket, bleach. The second list, written more faintly beneath, bore a different heading: What he doesn't remember. Under it were 4 entries. "The first hit didn't kill her. He called for me before it stopped. She was breathing when I arrived. I finished it because she was suffering." For months, this detail had remained unseen. Paper stuck together by moisture, the handwriting faint. But under infrared examination, the indentation was legible. The discovery rewrote the narrative. The fatal blow had not come from Evan alone. Melissa had arrived before Clara died. The final act of violence, the one that ensured silence, had been hers. The district attorney reviewed the evidence in private. Legally, the conviction could not be amended without confession, but morally the case had shifted. The label accessory no longer applied. The system had punished the cover-up, not the act itself. When confronted with the notebook in prison, Melissa refused to comment. She looked at the page, then at the investigator, and said only, "It doesn't change what I was protecting." The phrase was entered into record as her final statement. In the months that followed, psychologists from the University of Oregon used the case as a study in maternal cognitive reframing under acute stress. Their conclusion: Subject M. Reed exhibited substitutional guilt transfer, absorbing agency to maintain her identity as caregiver. Cleaning became ritual absolution. The investigation files were officially closed, but fragments continued to circulate through training seminars and forensic symposiums. The washing machine drum remained sealed in a temperature-controlled archive. Occasionally, technicians reported a faint chemical odor when the container was opened for inspection. Evan was released 3 years later. He changed his surname, relocated, and began studying engineering. In his mandatory exit interview, he was asked what lesson he took from the case. He said, "There's no such thing as clean." Then he smiled for the first time since his intake and added, "But she tried." The statement ended the file. That winter, a guard at the correctional facility found Melissa unresponsive in her cell. Cause of death: respiratory failure due to chronic infection. On her desk sat a folded towel, perfectly white, dry, and unused. Inside it lay a single object, a pearl earring, matching the one recovered from the washing machine years earlier. How it had come into her possession was never explained. The final forensic note on the Reed case, written by the same investigator who had stood over Clara Jensen's body, was only 1 sentence long. "Every act of love leaves residue. Hers just happened to fluoresce." The report ended without signature. Next case dismantles another perfect crime. Don't miss it.